Welcome back to The Intentional Workplace, a podcast where we spend 15 minutes each week to talk about everything HR to improve your business. I'm Maria Williams.
And I'm Jacob Stone.
And this week we're shifting the lens a little bit and talking about job searching, but from the candidate side. So, where do candidates go wrong in their job search? And how to choose the right role aligned to your career and not just the next job opportunity that may come your way. And this will be insightful for all the hiring managers and leaders out there too. I know we're going to focus on the candidate side of things, but for those of you on the employer side of things, to get a glimpse into the job searching process from a candidate's point of view. I know that I've been in both seats, the person seeking a job and the person trying to fill a job on the hiring manager side of things. And too often, candidates evaluate roles based on the title or the salary, often, or what's written in the job description, but not actually on how the company operates, what the culture is like, how decisions are made, if they're developing people in a certain way. So, today we're going to break down some of that on how candidates can think more strategically when they're looking for a job. I'm going to start with just a quick piece of data here. It's a widely known statistic that around 30 to 40% of new hires leave a role within the first 90 days. So that's almost half of employees out there that have taken a job, and then that job turned out to be something completely different than what they expected. So, Jacob, from your perspective, what's the biggest mistake candidates are making when they're trying to choose the right job opportunity?
Couple different things. First and foremost is when they get into the interview process, and this can be is kind of a loaded question because it's also dictated by the company of how they're running that interview. But a lot of times when candidates get into the interview process, they're afraid or they're timid to ask certain questions because they don't want to overstep or they don't want to count themselves out. And so they almost fake it till they make it. Um, one of the big things that, and I tell clients this all the time, the one of the worst questions that as an interviewer that you can ask an interviewee is, what are your strengths and weaknesses? It is not I mean, how do you answer that? I mean, and we've all been asked that in some way, shape, or form. How do you answer that? On the candidate side, when you get thrown that question, instead of saying, well, I my strengths are that I'm very collaborative and my weaknesses are that I work too hard. Ha 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 ha. Because I mean, how else are you supposed to answer it, right?
Mhm.
Um, the best way that I always tell folks to address that is to almost flip the script on them and say, well, it depends on what your environment is and what your definitions of strengths and weaknesses are. So how is your workflow? What is the typical day for you guys look like? So that way I can better answer your question. And it does two things on the candidate side. One, it pivots so that you don't have to answer such a silly question because it's silly. And the other thing too is it gives you insight into how their workflow is, what their culture is like, how do they actually operate on things like that, and it becomes more conversational. You're not being interrogated at this point. So that's a big one that I like to try to coach up on.
Yeah, that's a good one. And from the kind of the culture side of things, instead of a candidate asking something more vague, like what is the culture like there? Try to ask something much more specific. So I know on the interviewer side of things, behavioral based questions are pretty common. So companies will ask candidates, tell me about a time where you were juggling multiple priorities and you had to, prioritize your workload, something like that. You flip it, and as a candidate, ask those types of behavioral kind of questions to the interviewer. As an example, if you want to assess what the culture is like, can you walk me through a time where someone succeeded in this type of role or failed and why? What did that look like? And then you can really get a glimpse into what success looks like for the role, but also a glimpse into the culture a little bit too. If you get much more specific about examples, and it's okay to ask those types of questions. You should. It's a two-way interview process,
It is.
and you need to assess the fit just as much as they need to assess whether you're the right candidate.
Yeah, and it's not, and even ask, like, in the past role, what are the biggest hangups that you've had? What are the biggest challenges that this person's had that either we haven't been able to solve or that has just gotten under your skin, Mr. or Mr. Hiring Manager? What is it about this role that you keep getting high turnover for? If it is indeed that. Now, if it's they're expanding the role, and because this is the on the other side of this is, let's say the company is scaling and they're creating a new role. They a lot of times, unfortunately, they don't really know what that they have an idea of what it might look like, but they don't really know because they haven't had someone in that role as of yet. So how do you gauge that in an interview? From a candidate side, the best questions or the best way to address this is to ask them flat out, when you guys thought of this role and the need for this role, what do the metrics or goals look like for the first 30 days, for the first 6 months, for the first year? If you saw these actions or they hit these metrics, what would you consider a success? And what would you consider that, wow, we made not a great hire, this isn't a great fit? What does that look like? I think that shows hiring managers a couple of things. One, you're forward thinking. Two, you think pragmatically and that you're genuinely interested in forming whatever culture or whatever problem needs to be solved. And on the other side of that is it actually flips the script in that it makes the hiring manager think, wow, we never really thought about that, and we should probably think of what that actually might look like. So it works two ways.
Yeah, and we did an episode on job descriptions, and we talked about job descriptions, how they often just list a whole bunch of tasks,
Yeah.
and really they should be focused on what are the outcomes of the role. So you touched upon that a little bit just now, Jacob. And as a candidate interviewing for a job, ask about the outcome. So what does success look like, the 30, 60, 90 days, that kind of thing, is all that's all really good to get there too. What outcomes really matter for this job? What does it mean to be successful to you, hiring manager, in this job? Because that really goes beyond what is likely just written in the job description, which is the day-to-day kind of tasks, but what really matters for this job. And then you can gauge based on your experience, based on what you want in a job, whether you think you can actually be successful in that role. If so, great. But if not, then move on to another job, move on to, another potential job that's out there. So I think that the outcomes, it's important to really understand what the outcomes of the role are and what success looks like for that role.
And I know that we're over here talking about it like as if it were a candidate's market right now, as
Yeah.
of March 2026, which it's not. There's a lot of, unemployment rate is, I think, up to 4.4%. I know the February jobs report came back with negative 92,000. So we lost 92,000 jobs. So there's a lot of people that are probably listening going, that'd be a really great thing if I could like choose the job. But at this point, like I got bills to pay, I got this to do, and I'll take anything at this point. And I want to address that as well, that, you know, desperation can bleed out in an interview. It can come out. And so hiring managers, for the most part, understand how the job market is right now. They understand that there needs to be some flexibility, and there's a lot of candidates out there. So with people that are, maybe on their third or fourth month of, man, I've been interviewing, I haven't gotten any calls back, or I've been slinging resumes and I still like just nothing can land. What am I doing wrong? What can I do on the job search front? Because we were just talking about the interview part of it. And now on the job search front, your best bet is to just start really networking with those hiring managers. Um, and how do I find a hiring manager? Get on LinkedIn, go to your local commerce meetings, things like that, and really network your butt off and say, I need to be put in front. This is what I'm looking to do. These are my strengths and weaknesses. I know we're not supposed to say that, but this is what I'm good at, and this is what I'm not really looking for, I should say. And just be conversational. interviewing is nothing more than a conversation. I think too much we put stock into it's like an interrogation. You're not the FBI over here. I'm not like grilling you. And if that's your interview style, that's not the best way to get the top talent for long lasting. So the best way as a candidate you're going to end up finding a job is by having conversations, as many conversations as you possibly can. Keep applying, keep interviewing, but when you're in that interview, make it a conversation. Even if they're interrogating there's always things that you can do to help flip that. Chances are that they're not trying to interrogate you to be a jerk. They're doing it because they don't really understand how to interview. They don't have that skill. That's a skill in and of itself. We can do a whole nother episode on that later. But as the candidate, you can also help drive that conversation. And that's really what's going to help separate you from the talent pool is how you drive that conversation.
It's a great point around networking, and I wasn't thinking about that leading into this conversation today, but you got me thinking about it, and I think it's a great point, and I think, well, I know from my experience that I when I'm in a role at a company, I'm not thinking about networking outside, especially if I'm happy in the role, if I'm enjoying the role. I I haven't in the past taken time aside to focus on networking with people outside of the company. And I do think it's a good idea for anybody to do that, and to think about, even if you are happy in your job, you have a job, you're working for a company, if there are certain organizations that it would be a dream to work with someday, or that you would like to know more about, or be intentional about carving time out every quarter, whatever it may be, to have a coffee with somebody that works at X company, and just keep those relationships going, because a lot of job opportunities, whether we like it or not, come from some kind of networking or relationships. It certainly helps. So the more that you can just keep that constantly going on a regular basis, no matter what your situation is right now, when you are out there looking for a job, you have contacts and a network outside of the company that you were previously at. So it's a
Yeah.
good point.
And also unpopular opinion, but um, even if you are content with your job, and I say this to hiring managers too, is if you're a hiring manager and you have no intention of leaving, you should still take interviews. Like you should be as if you were a candidate and interview at different companies, to see what else is out there, but also it'll give you insight on what works and what doesn't work on the candidate side. Because now you've put yourself in their position of, okay, I've interviewed people and I've asked these same questions. And when they asked that to me, boy, was that uncomfortable. That didn't really hit the way I thought it did in my own head. So it gives you a different perspective. So I'm always okay with when a recruiter reaches out to you, even if you have no intention of ever leaving, take the interview because it'll do a couple things. You'll see what you never know what you don't know, but also it'll give you insight on how you can better yourself during the interview process. What questions can I ask? What style do I want to be? What KPIs or benchmarks do I want to gauge that maybe I didn't think of that now this person interviewing me has brought to my attention? So it's kind of that always learning, always exposing yourself to different ways of how different people are doing things as well.
Mhm. Yeah, and even on the interview side of things, as a candidate interviewing for a job, just one other tip that I have here that I've been thinking about is looking for consistency across interviews. And this is something that I've done in the past too, if I'm interviewing for something, is sometimes it's you try to think of different questions to ask each person that you're interviewing with. But it's good to ask kind of the same question, especially around what success looks like in this role. Some of these questions around culture and how decisions are made, and how development of employees looks, and all of that. So try to ask some of those same questions to look for consistency across interviewers, because you could often get a sense of kind of what the overall culture is like, depending on how different people answer the same question. And that's important to consider from the employer side of things too, to keep that in mind when you're interviewing candidates.
Excellent. Well, that does it for this week. Catch us next time, stream wherever you get your podcasts, and we will talk to you guys next Thursday.
All right. Thanks for joining.